welcome back to my workshop. Now today I'm going to be making a rather unusual set of wooden wheels. This is for a hobby horse bicycle. Now this is one of the very first bicycles ever made. It goes back to the very early 1800s, and it was little more than a plank of wood with two wheels, and you sort of scoot yourself along. Nobody had got around to inventing pedals at that point. Now the difficulty from my point of view, I mean there's a number of things that are difficult about it. First of all, I've never seen one before in the flesh. So I've got two drawings supplied by the customer. I managed to find a couple of pictures online, and probably the worst thing I could do is I spoke to some other wheelwrights who took great delight in telling me how difficult they are to make. So thank you all very much for you revelling in my misery. They are very, very thin around the rim, which is what we call the fellies, and also the spokes. In my terms, these are very, very thin. Obviously, if you were a bicycle maker, you know, they're big and chunky. But I'm used to making carriage wheels, so those are very thin. And also, they're a very unusual shape. And so therefore, I'm having to adopt a slightly different method of making them. But we'll come to that in a moment. So whilst I don't anticipate that anyone's going to rush out and start making hobby horse wheels by the hundred, this video is perhaps as much as anything else a sort of a record of how I've done it. I'm very conscious that as I get older, unless we document how we actually make these things, then nobody in the future will actually know how to do them. So I don't like to think that I'm considering my own mortality, because obviously I'm, you know, young and fit and still only 21 and will go on forever. However, it's important that those who come along behind me know how to make these things. So we're going to start with the spokes. I start with a standard piece of wood like this. This one is actually beech, but in the wheel itself I shall be using ash, and all the spokes that I've made so far have been ash. And what I would normally do is just put those in the vise, get the spoke shape out and just shape it. But this is the spoke I'm actually going for, and as you can see it's a long thin tapered spoke. It's an oval cross section, but it's a pointed oval. Whereas spokes are normally sort of an egg shape, so they're sort of pointed one side and rounded on the other. These are pointed both sides, which means I have to take a sort of slightly different route as to how I make them. And the way that I've chosen to do it is I do part of it in the lathe, and then part of it I do with a spoke shape. I'll whiz through the turning on the lathe bit because there's nothing more boring than watching a man turning something on a lathe. If you're watching this 20 years in the future, you'll probably come to the conclusion that us old timers, we were as big a bodgers then as you are now. Nothing changes. So here's the blank for the spoke on the lathe. Hopefully you can see I've already cut the outside of the tenon there, and then when I finish turning it, then I'll actually cut the haunches off. I've also measured down 2.5 inches. I just put a line all the way around. It's not millimetre accurate. What I'm trying to do is, obviously this is going to thin down, so I'm trying to get sort of that kind of shape. And then from here on upwards, it's going to be the size. And that size is 24 millimetres. I know it's a strange combination of inches and metric, but it works for me. So here we have our part-shaped spoke. You can see this was where our line was originally. It's now an easy matter to take this now to shape it with a spoke shave to get that sort of final shape. But we've taken the worst of it off. I've drawn a line down the centre there. That's where I want the ridge to be. So what I'm trying to do is to take some of the thickness off of here and make it a bit more pointed towards that side. And this is where you can start to see why I did it on the lathe first. I mean, it takes off a lot of the excess wood in a hurry, which is always good, but I can be much more accurate and consistent with the shape that I'm trying to achieve. If you find yourself wanting to be a wheelwright, one of the things you'll discover is you'll need to make a lot of your own tools, because what you want just doesn't exist. And this is a prime example of that. This mortising attachment for the drill existed, but I couldn't find a mortising machine big enough that would allow me to do hubs. Bear in mind, these are tiny little hubs. You know, some of my hubs are going to be 12, 14 inches across by, and you just can't physically get them under a mortising machine. So I had to make up this little tiny jig. Well, it's not that tiny, but I had to make this jig, and it works really nicely. And if you go into any wheelwright's workshop, you'll discover all kinds of other similar things. If this was a carriage hub, not only would it be much larger, but we have a steel sleeve going through the centre here called a boxing, which is a big sort of cast iron thing with a couple of flanges. In this case, I've got these things, which have been supplied to me by the customer, and it's just a little bit of 17mm pipe, but I need to get that inside. So I'm going to cover the pipe with linseed oil. Can't go wrong with linseed oil. And then I'm just going to press it in using the vise. And just slowly wind it in. And then this then fits on the axle on the bicycle. And there you are. That looks like both ends. That linseed oil will just sort of soak in and it will be marvellous. One of the tricks that I've learnt over the years is to cut at an angle. In fact I'm cutting at 2 angles. So I'm cutting at an angle that way, but I'm also cutting at an angle this way. What we have to take into account is the curve of the hub. If I cut a straight line across here, then these bits would be sticking out. So I'd either got to start channeling into the hub or find another method. But if I come in from an angle like this, then I actually fit around the sides of the hub. So I do exactly the same on this side. Exactly what that angle is depends on how big the hub is. Obviously, if it's a big, heavy horse hub, then it's enormous, and you probably don't have to do that too far. This is now going to line up with the circle of the hub. And we bang it home because we want a nice tight fit. So here we have our hub with all the spokes fitted. Starting to look quite good, isn't it? So now we need to cut all of these spokes to the right length, and this is where we use another one of these marvellous homemade tools. I made this one of the very first tools I ever made, and now you wonder how the hell you ever managed without it. I use it for so many things, and it's little more than a sliding point, so it's got a screw that holds it there. You move it up and down, so you set it to whatever size you want. So you just rub your lead pencil there, and then you can go around and cut every one to 200. Just because you can mark it, it doesn't mean you can cut it, but let's assume we can do that bit as well. So, So as they say, wish me luck, I'm going in. So the fitting of the felly is just like every other wheel I've ever done. The felly fits over 2 spokes. So I mark it. I put a centre mark on it as well, so hopefully I can get the hole in the centre. So I'll quickly drill that. Now these ones are nice and easy to do because the spokes are long and they're thin, so you can bend them in. The worst ones to do are the little short ones. Do the small wheels on a market cart, and they're short, solid wheels. To actually bend the spokes is nigh on impossible, so it's very hard work. So all I'm going to do now is just go around fitting them as I go, and then I shall put a little pin in the middle there to line up with the middle of there, or every single felly is then jointed up with the one next to it. Makes it nice and strong. And this is another piece of machinery you can't buy. This one probably goes back to sort of the mid 1800s. And what's more, that's spot on. This is what we like. So we've now rolled the tyre. So all we have to do now is make it fit. What we need to do is to measure all the way around the outside of the rim. We need to allow for all these little tiny gaps and things. And what we're trying to do, in an ideal world we wouldn't have any gaps. But inevitably there's going to be tiny little gaps. So what we want to do is to balance the gaps in the rims between the gaps that appear around here. And then when we put the tyre in the fire, it expands, put it over the top, we shrink it on, and that pulls the whole lot in. And then hopefully that gets rid, if we've got it right, all the gaps. That's the plan. So we start from here. And when we get to the first gap, we move it along. And as always, you check your measurements, because it's very easy to take a measurement. It's very difficult to try and stick something back together again afterwards. So you check the measurement several times just to make sure you've got it right. Yep, so this time we agree. So we now take this measurement and apply it to the tyre. And it's exactly the same process, but this time we reverse. And we're going on the inside of the tyre, not the outside. So I'll cut this, weld the two ends together. Now we get to the fun bit of being a wheelwright. So we've made our tyre, we've got our wheel, and that's got to go over the top of that. And although it's close, it's not going to fit. So what I'll do is I'll stick the tyre in a fire. That will heat it up, cause it to expand, and theoretically we can slip it over the top of the wooden bit, pour some water on it, and away we go. And as luck would have it, I've got all we need to make a fire behind me. Well, there you go, that went on easy. So here we are, 2 hobby horse wheels. Now if you ever ask anybody who makes anything what they think of what it is they've made at the end of when they made it, and they'll always tell you, oh no, it's not so good, and they'll see all the faults. They'll see all the bits where they struggled. But I think these are some of the best wheels I've ever made. I'm really very pleased with these. They've done exactly what they're supposed to do. All the joints are nice and tight. And believe me, that's not as easy as it sounds. It all fits together quite nicely and it runs flat. Which, for these wheels, that's exactly what you need. These 2 go off to a customer. They're going to a museum in the northeast. And I've got another one, which I've also made. But you will also note I did make 3. So I've got this one left. What am I going to do with it? Well, somebody sent me a message last night on Instagram and said, why don't you make a unicycle? And it's like, oh, now that's a good idea, isn't it? Don't know if I will, but rest assured, if I do, there'll be a video of it. Well, hopefully you enjoyed this one. If you do, go and have a look at some of my other videos. You never know, you might like those as well. Remember to sign up for Instagram and all those other bits and pieces of social media I'm supposed to tell you about. And it helps me rather a lot if you press the like button. It makes quite a difference to my life. Probably doesn't make any difference to yours, but it makes a difference to mine. So until we meet again, thanks for watching. Bye bye.